the job system is an extremely complex and subtle system that has many branches and sub-branches, and it is not easy to understand. But right now, the emphasis should be on what are the different things that put the job system under stress. What are the different things that pressure the job system into ever higher levels of performance? And the fact that lots and lots of people can no longer find their work in farming, it's easy to understand. It just means that there are lots more people looking for work, and they put pressure on the jobs. They want jobs, and if there are no jobs, then they complain. And then we get a division, and a division that will play a very important role in our whole conversation. I call it the butcher split, the split between people who are poor and people who are not poor. And we are moving into a situation where a very large percentage of the population, you think globally, if you think in terms of what's happening in Russia and what's happening in Indonesia and what's happening in India and what's happening in Africa, if you include all of that, you have an enormous number of people who don't have satisfactory work. In fact, you could say 80% of the population of the planet at the moment suffers from a shortage of work. So I like to use the terms, not poor people. I don't like that term, it sounds so pitiful. I think it's better to talk in terms of that are desert people and people that are oasis people. 20% of the people on the planet at the moment are oasis people. They live comfortably on their palm trees and they give them shadow and the nuts roll into their lap and so forth and so on. But there are lots of people, a much larger number of people, who don't know where they're going to sleep this night, who wander around looking for some place where they can sleep, who have to carry their tents on their backs. Those are the people that are what I call the desert people. And at the moment we have the job system has created a situation where, because of the pressures that are on it, because there is, besides automation, also farming, and in addition to farming, also globalization, because of these three factors, a split has, which we could call the butcher split, or the butcher cutting split. It has cut humanity into two pieces, one much larger than the other. And the division is between people who have a more or less decent, comfortable life, oasis people, and the much larger group of people who, because the job system is no longer adequate, have no longer an adequate amount of work and live the life, I think, can be described as the life of desert people. Now, think of this as a system. Think of this as a system that is dynamic. Think of this as something that is very real, very alive, very organic. Yeah, the job, we are talking about a complex, enormous organism. And in this organism now, things are at work. And that means one thing at work is this split between the oasis people and the desert people, but that's only one of the things that is at work. The next thing that is at work is that, of course, there is tremendous pressure to create more jobs. And that is the next piece of the pathology of the job system. The next thing that is now going wrong, that is a matter of concern, that is something that we want to fix, but that we don't have much of a way of fixing, is the fact that there is a great deal of pressure on to create more jobs. And the upshot of creating more jobs is, of course, that we need to speed up the economy as much as we possibly can, so economic growth becomes a really desired thing. We want economic growth. We want economic growth. Why? Because we have the job system. Why do we need economic growth? Because the job system moves us to have more economic growth, because automation abolishes erases jobs, and so now we need to do something else in order to multiply, to extend the number of jobs. And that means that we put pressure on the economy and want the economy to produce more, and the pressure speeds up the economy more and more. And the upshot is that we have something very paradoxical going on that I don't think is really properly understood enough. What we have going on is that on the one side there are lots and lots of people, in fact, in some ways more people now, who really feel, oh, no, we cannot ruin this planet. We have to be careful of the planet. We have to be careful of the resources of this planet. We have to keep the planet, we have to make it greener than it has been in the past. Not with the job system, that's the point. The job system forces us to turn the wheels of the economy faster and faster and faster. And therefore, the job system is what pushes us against the drive to economize, against the drive to live more modestly, to live more simply. And what we have is a situation where we continuously increase what the economy produces, which means that, of course, so to say, the waste increases and the production increases. And we do that because the job system compels us to do this, because we have massive forces that eliminate jobs. So now on the one side, there are the forces that eliminate jobs. So on the other side, we have to do things to create new jobs or more jobs, or to make it so that the loss of jobs does not become too tremendous, and that means that we insist on economic growth. Now, think about this. Lots and lots of people would really like to be more careful with our natural resources. They would like to be more careful with what we do with water, with what we do with forests, with what we do with all the things that make up nature. But actually, it is the job system that compels us, that forces us to lay waste ever greater dimensions of this natural environment. So here's something that may startle you, but maybe we have to come to grips with it. That is, to my mind, and I'm absolutely dead serious, or live serious, which is to me more important than dead serious. Serious is the fact that if we don't do something about the job system, our efforts to somehow reduce the consumption of natural resources is laughable, because the job system compels us to consume ever more natural resources, whether it's water or whatever it is. And so, now listen carefully, if you're serious about your ecological concern, if you're serious about not laying nature to waste, then maybe step back. Then maybe reconsider. Maybe only something as drastic as a different work system. New work is maybe the one way in which we could achieve something like a real attenuation of the amount of resources we consume. So I'm saying, if you want to be green, then you better make common company with new work. New work and being green go together. If you think you can be green and not participate in new work, you're kidding yourself, you're fooling yourself, because the power that pushes you towards more and more consumption is much greater than anything sort of on the side of things can possibly diminish or control. So that's the connection between greenness and new work. Putting it once more, if you're serious about being green, please take very seriously the idea of making common cause with new work, because only through a partnership between you and new work will you be able to reduce the consumption which drives the ecology of this planet into destitution and waste. Now we can drive this still further. We are not done. We are close to done, but we are not done. The next thing that happens is, of course, the problem of the climate. The problem of the climate in the last few months has gained enormous stature. People are talking about the climate as something that really is serious. I mean, if we don't do something about it, at this point, it's interesting that the people who are sort of on the edge of the political way of thinking and the political way of acting, the climate problem has gotten them. The climate problem has grabbed the throat, and they realize that they have to do something, because otherwise there will be more, there will be less this, and there will be less this, and islands will go under, so to say, will disappear under the surface of the sea. All of that is already beginning to happen. All of that can be studied at this point, what the climate is doing, what the climate is doing to us. Now, what I am trying to say is that it's the job system that is ultimately the devil. It's the job system that forces us into a pattern of consumption that makes the climate ever less humanly sustainable. So, turn the table again. If you're serious about the climate problem, if you are serious about the fact that the deserts are growing, that the glaciers are melting, that the oceans are rising, if you're serious about that, then consider that maybe there's only one way to really change this, and that is to change the work system we have from the old work system, from the job system, into a fundamentally different work system. Into a fundamentally different work system. That's part of what irritates me with the article that has just come out in the Atlantic. Yeah, of course, one can do this and one can do that and one can do other things. Of course, this is all very charming. And they do a good job of describing the possibility that there might be more artisans, and the possibility that there might be more crafts, and this, that, and the other. But they don't ask the question. The critical question is, what is happening to the facts that are beginning to kill us, that are beginning to kill this culture and this civilization and us? Are we coming to grips with that? Are we doing something that is sufficiently powerful to really put a halt to this? Well, basically simply moving chairs around in the old metaphor on the deck of the Titanic. So I'm saying, if you start to think about the consequences of the job system, of what the job system compels us to do, and I just now said it has something to do with what we do to the climate, it has something to do not just with the climate, it has also something to do. So, what we now need is a different work system. And new work is an attempt to conceptualize a new work system. That's why we call it new work. And there, the burning question is the change big enough? Is the change big enough to really change the situation in relation to the climate, in relation to natural resources? Those are the two things that I just now was talking about. The green, but also the climate. And I'm arguing that only a change from the old work system to the new work system can really materially change these two gigantic factors. to get a proper sense of the pathology of the job system, or of the troubles in which the job system now finds itself, I think one has to bring in a whole other realm that so far has not been mentioned. And that, to my mind, it's very odd that in many of the discussions about work, and books and books and books about work, this is hardly ever really mentioned, and no real spotlight is put on it, even though, to my mind, this may be one of the singularly most important and most dimension, the size of what we're talking about now, is huge. And the effect on the job system is enormous, maybe bigger than any other single factor. That's the realm of farming. Farming, until relatively recently, was the occupation, it was the work, it was what people did. It was 80%, 85%, somewhere in that neighborhood, of humanity worked in different ways on the production of food, which was extraordinarily complex and detailed. And so farming, until relatively recently, until sort of maybe 60 years ago, maybe 45 years ago, really was the work of the majority of mankind, 80% or less, or something like this. Now, and that is what is really remarkable, and it should be the cause of astonishment and of amazement and of mouths that open and don't close again. Namely, now we have about 4% of the population working on farms, which in other words means that roughly somewhere around 75% of humanity, 75% of the people who worked on farms, 75% worked on farms, that from these 75% now we are down to 4%. So a tremendous impact has had. And that has some resemblance to automation. It's of course connected with new technologies in agriculture, new technology in cutting grass and drying grass, of all the different technologies that go into making cows produce the right kind of milk, and all of that is of course highly industrialized, and that's the point. We have gone through the industrialization of agriculture. That was relatively recent. That all happened in maybe the last 60, 70 years or so. But now we actually have a situation where only roughly something like 4% of the population working on farms. What does that mean? What that means is that there is a huge number of people who in one way or other have lost their work, are, to use the different term quite on purpose, they are unemployed. We don't usually think of that way, but that's the point I'm making, that actually all the farmers that used to work on farms, which now no longer can work on farms, for many reasons that have to do with the world market, that have to do with industrialization of agriculture, that have to do with how all of these things are now produced en masse, as opposed to in small farms. All of that has had the result that there is a huge number of people who are looking for work. So you have to put these things together. I mean, that is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give some picture of what actually the larger picture is, as opposed to just a snippet here or there. That is, the larger picture is, yes, there is automation, and automation is in its early stages and will continue and will become more massive as we go on. But automation is only one factor in this. The next factor is not automation, but the next factor is farming and what has happened to farming. And so try to think about this. That is, there are now two enormous forces that are cumulative forces, that belong together, that add to each other, that are additive to each other. That is, there are two huge forces that cut away at the job system, that make for fewer jobs, that make it so that the job system is running out of jobs, that there is less work to be done. Because even in farming now, and we were talking about farming a few minutes ago, that now is part of what is included in the pathology of the job system, that too is endangered by automation, is endangered by the possibility of the jobs being erased. Now, the idea of farming, to include farming in the discussion of work, is actually odd. I mean, nothing is more obvious than that. But if you read around and study what people have written about work, even right now, even in the article in the Atlantic Monthly right now, farming is barely mentioned. I think it's actually not mentioned at all. And to my mind, maybe as big, maybe even bigger a factor than automation. Now, there's automation farming, but there's more. The third factor is globalization. And globalization is something that needs to be understood. It's very easy to completely misunderstand what globalization really means. So go back to understand the word. What is it that deserves the name globalization? That is, that something is globalized, that something becomes worldwide. Well, we usually think, when we talk about globalization, of what are, to my mind, very minor little symptoms, namely that a factory here is moved into that country where the wages are lower, or a factory over there is transported with this. And people talk about that as what shows globalization. To my mind, that is very misguided. It's one of the things that blinds us to what is really going on. And what I'm trying to do is to give some sense to you of what really is going on in the larger picture, not just if you look through a keyhole, but if you look at the large perspective of this. And globalization is part of that. And what globalization really means is very different from just one factory or another factory being moved. What globalization means is that worldwide, in every country, no matter how distant, no matter how primitive, no matter how colonized it was, whether it's Borneo or Sumatra or Indonesia or whatever, all of these are now countries that are included in the pursuit of jobs. All of them have now reached a point where people want to have a job. And that, of course, means that the demand for jobs has increased enormously over the last 20 or 30 years, because now all of the people worldwide that used to do things, now they all have, so to say, become included in our system. And they're no longer colonies or anything like that, but they are included in the system that emphasizes, that monopolizes, that makes it so that jobs are the one and only way in which people make a living and can survive. And that is true of the Congo, it's true of South Africa, which I know very well, and of any number of other countries, in India and so forth. All of these are countries in which people desperately want jobs, and in which poverty has reached dimensions that we can hardly imagine. Now, those are factors that have to be taken into consideration if we start to think about what really is happening to the job system. So, to bring this to a temporary conclusion, I'm trying to say that yes, of course there is automation, and automation is major, and automation is at the beginning. But automation is not the only factor. And it's very myopic, it's very blind, it's very not really attentive to the situation. when all kinds of people who should know better, who write books, who write articles in journals, forget the other factors that play a great role in what is happening to the job system. So the job system is under a multiplicity of pressures. Well, differently put, job system suffers from a multiplicity of diseases, or the pathology of the job system is complex. We are at a point where it's absolutely no longer foolish that, well, this system that lasted for roughly 200 years is now at the end of its wits. Maybe the job system has done what it can do. And what we now need is a new system of work, namely new work. That's what we need to take the place of old work, where old work is job work. And that's in part because there are so many different aspects that have now made inroads into the realm of work, of jobs. And not just automation, but in addition to automation, also farming, also globalization.